Hi everybody. In today's video, we will talk about a story written by Joyce Carol Oates. This story is a part of a collection called The Museum of Dr. Moses. This book was published on August 6th of the year 2007. And this is a very particular book because throughout the stories, the author shows us a more dark and awful point of view of the results of the collision of male and female psyches. These tales are filled with mystery and suspense, but the horror comes in little portions so you can notice it right away. We are going to talk about the story that starts this collection, and it is called Hi, How You Doing? But first, let's do a quick rundown of 5 main characteristics, this being the characters, the plot, important events, writing style, and last but not least, the theme. Let's talk about the characters first. This story has various characters, but the main one, and whose point of view the story revolves around, it's a jogger, which is described as a large, good-looking man. We'll get a more complete description later. We don't know anything about him apart from his appearance. The plot: we are introduced to a large, good-looking man jogging in a park. He appears to be a little cocky and does not realize he makes other people uncomfortable. He goes up to random people while he jogs, telling them the same phrase, "Hi, how you doing?" Each encounter appears deeper and reveals insecurities and issues about the characters that are being asked. This process repeats until the main character approaches a last man, and when he says his phrase, the man shoots him. Now, let's talk about some important events. First, the jogger meets Diane Hendricks, which is the first instance in which we see a deeper inside of her mind, as we all see in the rest of the joggers. This is a trend that repeats throughout the story until the main character gets shot by the last person he encounters. This is what makes the theme so prevalent. For the writing style, Joyce Carol Oates tends to write about dark subjects that are totally plausible in everyday life. A very notable example would be the story Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been?, in which we read about a girl being stalked by an older man in her own house and most likely gets kidnapped at the end. The author gets really repetitive and uses mainly commas throughout the story to imply a fast pace. After all, we are talking about a jogger. Now, let's talk about the theme. It has a sense of irony since usually jogging is done by people in order to release stress. But in this story, all the joggers are really stressed and they just get more uncomfortable when they are spoken to by the main character. This story also reveals dangers about common activities and how most people don't consider the potential dangers of talking to strangers or what could happen in a public setting. Last but not least, the plot. The plot reveals dangers that the reader can process and understand how plausible these scenarios are. Now, let's dive into the story. In the story, Hi, How You Doing?, Joyce Carol Oates depicts the violence that has captured and encapsulated today's culture. The undimmed murder of an innocent jogger in the end of the story validates and justifies the fear that so many individuals feel. In Oates' short story, Hi, How You Doing?, the protagonist is depicted as, and I quote, a good-looking husky man, 6'4" in the late 20s or early 30s, Caucasian male, solid build as a fire hydrant, carries himself like an athlete or an ex-athlete. Throughout the police report given the description of the protagonist, Oates foretells his surprising fate at the beginning of the story, which in turn creates tension and suspense for the reader as the protagonist goes about what would otherwise be a typical day. Through this story, Oates illustrates the abnormal fear that much of our culture shows towards human interaction. The short story is told in one complete fast-paced sentence, symbolic and similar to the jogger's pace, and racing, tangled thoughts going through their minds. Through the story, the protagonist comes across the joggers who consumed and preoccupied with untangling the thoughts in their minds and trying to sort out the issues in their lives. The story takes place on a, and I quote, moist wood chip path at the western edge of the university. Even though the joggers are exercising in a safe, quiet, peaceful environment, the protagonist interrupts their ominous thoughts as he approaches them with a simple greeting of, "Hi, how you doing?" This seems to jolt the joggers out of the sanctuary and safe place they have created in their minds in order to briefly escape reality. This is illustrated with Oates writes, and I quote, "Madeline is a lab technician at Squibb, lost in a labyrinth of her own tangled thoughts. Career, lover's learning disabled child. Startled out of her reverie by a loud aggressive friendly greeting, 'Hi, how you doing?' flung at her like a playful slap on the buttocks as the husky jogger passes." The way these various runners react to this abrupt greeting and change in their routine symbolizes their own attitudes, anger, and anxieties. The theme of Joyce Carol Oates' "Hi, how you doing?" is critical for the reader to have a full understanding of the irony behind the protagonist's death. The theme of the story is about the happiness in life so many people have numbed themselves to or feel as though they are forbidden to feel. Through the surprise and ironic death of the protagonist, Oates shows how easily that joy and happiness can disappear or be ripped away. The setting and theme of this story relates to our current society and how individuals within society feel entitled to extreme privacy and personal space and are unable to cope with stress, anxiety, and the struggles of everyday life. Oates also depicts and how an invasion of this could trigger irrational reactions to something as small as a greeting. In the beginning of the story, Oates introduces the protagonist through a police report stating, and I quote, "Good-looking husky guy, 6'4" in the late 20s or early 30s, Caucasian male," as the initial police report would note. This creates the anticipation of danger for the reader through the story. When the protagonist encounters his final runner, the reader begins to gain the sense that this runner is different than the others that the protagonist has come across so far. This runner is experiencing extreme emotional turbulence, which is shown through his desire of avoidance and introverted instincts. Through this, Oates exposes how a friendly greeting could be viewed as an invasion to some, especially when suffering from copious amounts of stress. Oates helps the reader understand this through a glimpse of his mental internal thoughts and feelings when the young man thinks, and I quote, "Instinctively, you turn your gaze downward, no eye contact. You've been lost in thought, the very pain, anguish, and futility of your thoughts." The last man the protagonist encounters is symbolic of the other runners, as well as the internal thoughts and struggles of society. The young man's internal dialogue as the protagonist approaches symbolizes the common struggles and the inability to cope them many people experience. In this story, the young man's inability to cope results in the murder of an innocent man. The thoughts and feelings of the young man are relatable and shared with many individuals in today's society, including the reader. This creates a feeling of understanding and sympathy towards the murderer, as they can relate to him and what he is feeling. This extreme reaction to something as simple as a friendly greeting illustrates the struggles and senselessness that accompanies the majority of the violence experienced within our culture. This story gives a really harsh point of view of something that is really common, which is the way we cope with situations and interactions. We all have a different threshold for what we allow and what we don't. In this story, we see the two extremes of this spectrum. All the runners our main character came across had their own inner monologue since they all had their own problems. But the moment they heard, "Hi, how you doing?" they will snap out of their thoughts and give a simple answer. But the last one, we saw that he had a deeper and more serious issues, and when our protagonist greeted him, he got triggered. He felt attacked and responded in a violent way. We had a more personal and relatable instance recently. By the time this video got uploaded, we just went through the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic put us through almost 2 years of isolation. So when the time to come back out came around, a lot of people were terrified to their core by just thinking of exposing themselves. But others were ecstatic to be back in the streets and go back to their normal lives. I really recommend that you read the story for yourself and experience it in all its glory. And while you're at it, do yourself a favor and read the whole collection of stories of The Museum of Dr. Moses. It is a really good read. That's all for today's video. Take care.